Hello and welcome to Let's Review. This seems to have been happening a lot recently. For whatever reason, I've been playing a bunch of longer games recently, and as such I've had to stretch the Let's Plays over 2 weeks. This does, however, mean that it is once again time to go digging in the crate. A while back, I talked about the most disappointing game that I own, Space Siege. And at the end of that, I promised that I would, at some point, talk about the worst game that I own. Now I think is the time to do that, and before I reveal the game, I want to clarify. I have played worse games for the channel. This is just the worst game that I own a physical copy of that I bought for my own personal enjoyment. And with those caveats out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, Hellgate London. I could have sworn London always had a portal to hell. Obviously, it's under the Houses of Parliament, everyone knows that. Hellgate London is not a good game, but once again the potential was there. This game happens to have probably one of the best damn opening cinematics I have ever seen. And it's so good that I'm actually going to put a link in the description of this video because I think you should all go and watch it. Did you not write fan fiction based on that cinematic back when you were in school? Yes, I did. And wasn't it, well, terrible? Oh god, yes. It was actually several years after that that I eventually acquired a copy of this game, and boy was it one hell of a letdown. But before I talk about the reasons why this is a terrible game, I'm going to talk about the stuff I actually like. The armor designs are gorgeous, and I really love an awful lot of them. They have this kind of medieval crossed with high-tech look that just pushes all of my buttons. There's also some pretty nice creature designs, and honestly a lot of the weapons look pretty cool as well. And that's honestly kind of it. So everything about the actual game that you do like was done by the art department. Thinking about it, yeah, and frankly I hope they went on to better games. The main problem with this game is that it doesn't have a clue what it wants to be. At different times it tries to be a first-person shooter, a third-person hack and slash, a Diablo-style dungeon crawler, a single-player RPG, and a massively multiplayer online game. And as a result it ends up feeling really, really schizophrenic. Aiming for the moon and falling flat on their face? More like trying to build the perfect house with everything in it you ever wanted, but without remembering to lay the foundations. It doesn't take long for the cracks to begin to appear and the whole thing to collapse. The first of the main problems is that the combat is terrible. Swords pass through enemies, affecting nothing but health bars. Guns have no weight or recoil, and magic feels the floatiest of all. So there is at least decent variety to the combat styles, then? Yes and no. While there is variety in the combat, it's of a weird kind. There are 6 classes available to you, split across 3 factions. The Templars will use sword attacks, using either 2 swords or a sword and a shield. The Hunters will focus on long-range fire, and one of their 2 classes actually is a summoner that brings in robotic allies. And the Kabbalists will throw magic at the enemy, and again, one class is a summoner class, bringing in small demons as allies. But the problem is that once you pick your class, which you do right at the beginning of the game in character creation, you will stick to the same variety of combat over and over and over again. Is there not a levelling system? Oh, there is, but it's incredibly rare that one of the abilities actually changes the combat in any specific way. Most of the time you'll just be wailing on the enemy with basic attacks, and that gets tedious because most of the enemies are extremely bullet spongy, soaking up absolute truckloads of damage before they eventually go down. It also doesn't help that there often tends to be absolutely bucket loads of the buggers, and as a result combat quickly becomes a very tedious mess. Now, I could excuse that if the story was good. But here, I take it is not good then? Honestly, I have no idea. This game was originally intended to be both a single-player RPG and a massively multiplayer online roleplay game. And as a result, all of the story is told not through dialogue, not through characters, but through mission briefing text boxes. And those very quickly get very boring. It was less than a few hours into the game that I just stopped reading them. And frankly, the rest of the game doesn't exactly give you a good handle on the game's lore either. Would you actually be interested in that lore if they did? Absolutely. I mean, I refer you back to that fantastic intro cinematic. It got me interested in the world and made me want to know more about it. A world in which a demonic portal opens in London and starts shedding bucket loads of demons. Humanity is forced to retreat underground into the London underground system, where they are guarded over by three groups of protectors, those that I mentioned earlier when I talked about the classes, the Templars, the Hunters, and the Kabbalists. The problem is that nothing more is done with that, and frankly, it would have been an interesting thing to explore. Unfortunately, the story is just told so damn poorly that it's impossible to get into. And frankly, it's just wasted potential. The other thing this game was trying to sell itself on was something that at the time was relatively uncommon: procedurally generated levels. Personally, I've never really seen the appeal of that as a selling point. After all, it only comes into value on repeat playthroughs. True, but it can at least add some enjoyment to those repeat playthroughs. The problem here is that it'll be a bleeding miracle if you actually make it to the end of the game without just giving up out of boredom. I did it once, never again. And the thing is, once again, they could have done something interesting here. The problem is that all the levels it creates are just pretty bland. There just were not enough tile sets to make anything really interesting. And unfortunately, because the game's enemies don't level with you, if you don't both grind and do every single available side quest, you will end up hideously underleveled by the end and will just get swarmed by wave after wave of incredibly bullet spongy enemies. So was there anything about this game you actually liked? Well, apart from the opening cinematic and the art design. Oh. Well, in that case, no. Hellgate London is once again a game with some interesting ideas, but with a very badly botched execution. And frankly, what potential there was is mired under a weakly told story and incredibly dull, tedious gameplay. And yet, for some reason, reports and rumours persist of people constantly trying to bring it back from the dead. Who would have thought that Dr. Frankenstein would go into video game development? Well, Matt, I guess we've got to pay the bills somehow. Apparently, back in 2008, a Korean company bought the rights and actually produced an expansion set in Seoul. However, from the limited research I've done, I don't think that one ever made it out of Korea. Later, in 2014, a game called Hellgate Tokyo was actually listed on Steam Greenlight, and it got passed through, but nothing has ever been heard of since. And as such, we can probably assume that it's dead. Ultimately, Hellgate London was a game with interesting ideas that screwed up pretty much all of them. The only things in it that I genuinely like were done by the art department and by external people creating those fantastic cinematics for them. And frankly, it's just sad to see an interesting idea given this bad an execution. Maybe if somebody does acquire the rights, we'll actually get a half-decent game out of the idea, but I'm not terribly hopeful. Now, if you'll excuse me, I really should check on my own demonic portal. Things have been quiet for a while and, well, frankly, now it's making me a little bit nervous. I'll see you later.